Hello, I'm Dave Marks. This is
I'm going to talk about currencies in a second.
Geopolitics panel, and we're meeting here with Mark from Money Circus, David S., and Wasserman, and David S. has once again disconnected. So, how's it going, guys?
Very well, very well. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's exciting. My birthday party is tonight, and I will be 48 tomorrow.
Oh, wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Oh, happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Okay, so you wanted
Well,
to talk...
okay, so let's go to our favorite part for the world. We'll come back to Europe in a minute because, unfortunately, they're stuck with the euro, which is a horrible thing. I mean, what they did to Bulgaria. And even to Croatia. I have a friend who lives in Israel, and he was living in Croatia. At the moment they forced the euro on Croatia, prices across the board doubled. So, not a very happy situation. As you know, I've always been opposed to the euro, and the younger I get, the more opposed I get to the euro, because I just think it's making everybody poor. And it's completely devastated both the southern countries, the Mediterranean countries, Eastern Europe, and Bulgaria. People are absolutely furious about it, but there's not much anybody can do. And now, of course, you have Donald Tusk babbling away that he wants the euro in Poland. I mean, and it's absolutely bizarre. Nobody really wanted the euro in Bulgaria, and nobody wants to admit that. And to make matters even worse, now that Montenegro is hurrying towards succession into the European Union, now all the benefits that came from citizenship by investment are down the toilet. So I don't see how the euro is helping anybody. But what do I know? You know. So now let's go over to Israel.
Well, I would like
I'm
to
a
stay
fan
on
of
that
Trump.
issue, the currency issue, especially with money here. What do you
Well,
think?
look, I mean, let me jump in very, very briefly. I don't want to derail David. I was just typing away here to look up my latest article. One of the people, there was this big deal at the Munich Security Conference. I'm sure everybody's aware. I won't go back into it. You know, Marco Rubio's speech and the pushback by Friedrich Merz, and then the European Central Bank boss, Christine Lagarde, spoke up, and she laid the goods on the table. She said that the ECB is preparing for geoeconomic, not a phrase I've heard before, geoeconomic fragmentation. And she warned of the danger of fire sales of euro-denominated securities in global funding markets. In other words, European single currency is in danger of a fresh round of turmoil, such as erupted in 2008. And she's worried about a sell-off. And this is blatant, open threat or appeal, whichever way you look at it, by the Europeans saying, look, our currency, you can't let us not have our war against Russia, where we've got to take the deposits, and we've got to dream of those $75 trillion in natural resources, but you've got to get behind us, you know, in terms of military force. And to cut it really short, what Rubio is saying, in my view, is that no, you Europeans, you've got a shared heritage, but you've got to fight your own war. That was the way I took his comments. And Lagarde and Merz and the others, well, Merz was off the freaking wall. Merz was saying net zero, carbon neutral, you know, DEI, all the crap which has driven the European economy into the toilet. And he's still committed to it. But the bizarre thing is, well, maybe it's not bizarre. He's the former employee of Larry Fink. Larry Fink's now sitting there as co-chair of the World Economic Forum. So, okay, I'm not going to say which direction the orders are going. Are they going from Germany to the WEF, or from the WEF, where He's an asset manager. He's not the owner. He's a manager of assets. His orders able to compel Germany? I don't know. I'm not going there. All I'm saying is the difference. If you look at what Lagarde was up to with this appeal not to force us into a fire sale of European assets, and on the other hand, Rubio.
Well, how can they know? Just a minute. Sorry to interrupt. And by the way, guys,
please interrupt. Please interrupt.
Terrible podcast for me, but I just saw it and I didn't expect to be in a cafe with a cell phone without a headset. I promise sometimes in the next 2 weeks I'll get proper headsets. So even if I'm in a cafe, but today I'm looking, this is rank amateur and I apologize about it.
No problem.
But the bottom line is, as I don't know who said it in the Reich in 1939, we want war. Well, here we are again. The bottom line with I call them the Brussels thugs, I'm sorry, is we want war. Now, the one missing ingredient, as Alex Strainer, who I have mixed feelings about for obvious reasons, has said correctly, is they have not, and this is where Mertz is going to run into a problem. They have not inculcated the young people in the Schengen countries into that patriotic fervor and also deprivation plus patriotic fervor that Ukraine successfully did for 10 years to prepare for the war against Russia. The Western European countries have not been successful at doing that. So in order to, I mean, there was no enthusiasm in 1938 to go into the Sudetenland. But what most people know is that there was no enthusiasm at all in 1939 for the Polish campaign, zero. Because believe it or not, Germany, with all its Hitler Jugend and Hitler Quecks, the famous movie, and Vorwärts and all that, for some reason the Germans, being Prussian, don't inculcate their people the same way that some of the more Slavic Eastern Europeans do. And I think the reason is because in Germany, even with the Weimar Republic, the economics do not equal the deprivation that you have in the plains, in the steppes, in that area known as Ukraine and what they later on called the Holodomor. So it's much easier to inculcate people, but Germany, the basis of getting the enthusiasm of people to go to war, not there. So what they're going to do, they're going to use foreigners. Well, the foreigners will not have that much enthusiasm either. So I don't see why it is that everybody is shouting for a war economy, but even me, and I'm not very educated, I don't see any enthusiasm for it. And yet they want to create an economic situation of deprivation.
Yeah, they're
I was just in Spain about 6 weeks ago. And a girlfriend of mine, ex-girlfriend of mine, when we were talking, the average salary in Spain right now for a lawyer, the highest salary, if you don't own your own law firm, is 2,000 euros a month. And that's brutto. That's not net. That's before taxes. How the hell are you going to survive on that in a place that's expensive? I think so. What money is talking about is correct. They're going to have fire sales, but I don't know how they can roust people in. They're going to say, well, we don't need ground troops. But for the financial reasons, the idea is we just shoot missiles and shoot airplanes and it's all hunky-dory. The problem with that method, Chantilly? Yeah, I thought that. The problem with that method is that in order to do Keynesianism at a crazy rate, you must employ ground troops. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah.
What do you mean by ground troops to employ to enforce Keynesianism?
You got to send the boys in. If you don't send the boys in, you will not get the same economic effect as not sending the boys in. That's my opinion.
Why? But I'm stumbling on that one.
Yeah, for me, look, these guys think they can conjure up an army out of nowhere, and they can't. It doesn't work that way. It takes time. One of the reasons the Germans were able to do what they did in the 30s, which was so rapid for they still had an industrial base, for rapid rearmament, which the Germans and much of Europe doesn't have right now. And they had millions of World War I veterans still standing around, partially trained and able to form up an officer corps. You can't, the Europeans spent the last 40 years dismantling all that stuff
I think
because there was a threat. They didn't want masculine men.
I think you guys are too based or too tied to reality, and that makes you unable to comprehend the thinking that's going on in Brussels.
Sure.
Because that thinking is not based in reality. It's based in an idea that you can bend reality to your will. And they're thinking, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be because I don't know that much about international finance, but if I'm not mistaken, the euro is insolvent if you look at their bond obligations.
Yeah.
And so they're desperate, and they think that they can propaganda their way out of this like they did for the last 10 years or so. And it's really not more complicated than that. You have people who are completely detached from actual reality, who believe that if you control the media and control the narrative, you can make anything happen.
Yeah, if you look at the latest,
They cannot because in the 1930s you had something called positivity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was the whole crux of the Hitler Jugend, was positivity. There is no positivity. Without positivity, and it's impossible under the current economic situation and familial situation, which is anti-family, you are not going to get positivity. They have no plan for it. The only place that it's worked has been in Ukraine, and to a far, far lesser degree in the Baltics, and that's it. The positivity doesn't take. Scandinavia is trying to go above everybody else who created. They may succeed, but in Germany, no way. And they also didn't have all the migrants in the 1930s.
They're not even trying with positivity. What they're doing, you've had Ireland and Canada in the past week both announced that military service is a path to citizenship. And this has been proposed in the US. We know, I forget the name of the various congressmen or senators who've said it. But clearly they've said, this bunch of people that no one can understand why they've been admitted into the country. In Ireland, they're being housed in disused military barracks. And now we have this announcement, official, in Canada and Ireland, that the imported migrants would be a very useful military force to replace our locals who don't want to fight.
Well,
and that's the game.
The people they imported want to fight.
Yeah, but that's been done in history before. It's been a great failure. That's been done in history. And generally, the whole Janissary system doesn't work very well. Maybe in the Middle East, but you saw how it ended up in Rome. It really doesn't work that well.
The Ottomans made it work. The Ottomans made it work across Europe, but it was, okay, you could say it came to an end eventually. But they did run it fairly well for about 400 years. They're the only people who actually did. Nobody else managed to co-opt a foreign cohort and turn them into your own military. It was only the Ottomans did that.
Two things. One, David, you have some foam on your nose. Two, if I was of a conspiratorial bent of mind, I would say that the drive to create war and then the solution to place all the immigrants in the army is the first step of a plan to subjugate the native population.
Mm-hmm. Well, that will be the logical conclusion, but it's being presented, of course, as being projected out there. But then so was the war on terror. It was projected as out there, Mm-hmm. And then we saw that the militarization of the police and the militarization all came home, and Humvees literally came home from Afghanistan and were given to the local police. And then people start wondering if Douglas Valentine was right in his.
Okay, the problem you cannot compare. You cannot compare the putative war on terror with anything that's in the homeland. So when Shire once wrote the war came home to Germany, the war has already come home to Europe in the sense of huge taxes, deprivation, no possibility of advancement, living, I wouldn't say in the squalor of the 20s. I'm not going to go that far, but it's hurtling in that direction.
It's
A lot of deprivation that most kids are not used to.
Did you see David, the Zach Polanski, who's the Green politician who's fronting the Green Party in Britain, did his latest podcast from a room, which is obviously a set, but it looks like my great-grandmother's room. I have two arms of my family. One arm of my family was very wealthy, based in South African wealth, and the other arm of the family was actually Welsh, and they came from hill farmers, and they were poor. And Zach Polanski's podcast came from my poor Welsh grandmother's sitting room with the threefold table, where you folded in the legs and the top of the table came down, and you've got the fireplace, and you've got nothing much else except the stoker for the fire and the three-leg table in one corner of the room. And he is sitting there telling people, well, this is what you're returning to. You're going to go back to a 1930s household with pretty well nothing in your damn room except the stoker to turn over those few coals that you have. This is the green message. Now, I won't go into that because it's a diversion from what we say, but that's to my mind, that's the flip side of war. It's always been the flip side of war. War, with a few exceptions, and I'm not I studied history. I call myself a historian, but I'm shit. I can't remember many wars which really enriched countries. Most wars have always managed to demolish the domestic situation. It's basically been changing the structure at home, and that's where I think we're heading.
Would you agree?
Yeah, but doesn't it to some degree save the banks? I mean,
Would you agree that wars enrich individuals?
Oh, they enrich individuals, of course, if you're in the right side of the game, particularly if you're lending the money to finance the war, or you're making the cannons, of course, yes. Yes,
well,
you get rich out.
A phase of Western history where certain individuals have managed to manipulate the system so that they can continue to be enriched at the individual level at the expense of the masses.
Well, I mean, I've again don't claim to be an expert, but I looked into the aftermath of the Second World War. When you look at, on the one hand, you've got the banks who were involved with refinancing the Germany after the First World War, which effectively allowed the Second World War to happen. Yep. But then you also had, of course, the big German families, the Quants of BMW, and these large manufacturing families who were remarkably not prosecuted and were left untouched by the West after the Second World War, and they sat there with this massive chemical and manufacturing wealth. The Quants apparently made 10 times more money during the war than they made during peace. Yep. So you can use 10x as your rough comparison for how much money you make from war if you're a big manufacturing company. The Quants are notable, not just to demonize the Quants, although they're worth demonizing. I mean, they've hidden their history pretty successfully, but they were pretty advanced way back before the Second World War. They were heavily into batteries. They'd somehow worked out that batteries, which you would have thought were irrelevant in the sort of 20s, were going to be crucial. And so when the Second World War came along and you had planes which needed to run, radar systems, etc., they needed batteries on those planes. The Quants produced all those batteries. So there you had, nowadays they're into graphene, but that's another story. They've always been very advanced in terms of the anticipation of the next war. That's what I'm trying to say. It's almost like they see it coming.
Actually, it's funny about the batteries that people were equally astonished when Buffett bought Duracell. And I said, there's nothing to be astonished about.
Yeah. I mean, today, but, I'm really mixed on the advance of, or non-advance of society. On the one hand, when I was working in Russia, I sort of came across from a Russian perspective, not from an American perspective, this character Kondratiev and his theory of cycles. And he was not the first. He was developing the idea of cycles from others. And of course, in the US, and when I was working with CNBC years ago, Kondratiev was, this is market cycles. We're looking at wave theory, how you track the market. It was purely from a financial perspective. Can I do wave theory? Can I make more money in the market? But Kondratiev was also talking about the way industries should develop. And my argument, I mean, maybe I'm being simplistic, but you have to simplify in order to fit it into a conversation. Is that we hear all this talk from the World Economic Forum about the fourth industrial revolution and the next big advances coming. But if you look at it through Kondratiev's eyes, we aren't on the brink of a new economic revolution because everything previous advanced. You had, water wheels. After water wheels, people added heat, so they created steam power. And then steam power was kind of turned into someone discovered oil, and you could make internal combustion engines. And then it took at the same time, somebody else was forking off and creating steam engines. And each step, and we got turbines, and from turbines we got nuclear energy. Everything was one step to another. Now I came across this idea. This hit me, stupid as I am, 15 years ago, when the Russians set up this Skolkovo institution, and they were banging on about nanotechnology. This is the Russians in 2010. I'm thinking, what the heck? Where are they going to? What's this nanotechnology? What the hell are they on about? The only nanotechnology we had at that time was kind of paint, titanium white paint. That uses nanotech. And the Russians didn't, to my mind, unless there was some secret development, I don't think they went anywhere with nanotechnology. I think it was a marketing strategy, like BRICS was. BRICS was to boost the emerging markets. Yeah,
negotiating tool as well.
Jim, what's his name from Goldman Sachs? You've got to put your money into the emerging markets. Go for the BRICS. And then you got Skolkovo, which was the Russians saying, oh, yeah, we're into nanotech and this is the next stage. And I was looking at it, and I wasn't even talking to friends. I just came across, I'd already known Kondratiev from, as I say, from not from Wall Street. I was working in London, City of London. Kondratiev was the big obsession with the wave theory guys among the investors. And then I re-encountered Kondratiev, and then shit, this guy's a Russian. Well, of course he is, given the name. But this guy's a Russian. What was he really talking about? Well, he was really talking about the waves of industry. And I dug into it, and I'll shut up now because I think I've made the point. There isn't, from Kondratiev's point of view, we're not on the brink of another wave of industry. We've actually entered, as Tom Luango says, hyper-financialization, where we're not really making anything. We've turned the capital markets into the driver of economic growth, into the driver of GDP. Right. So what we've really got is just money chasing money.
Yes.
we haven't got. They can talk as much as they like about take this and take that and hype. I don't know, trans this.
Well,
and trans
that's the
that.
cycle I think the Trump administration is starting to break, and that we may well be on the verge of that thing by getting away from the use of that. Did you know that there are going to be 4 nuclear reactors online by the 4th of July in the United States that are brand new? They started construction of these around January, and they will be available in the United States by the 4th of July.
Excellent.
Yeah, I did hear that, and if that's true, it's an absolute game changer because Mike Adams and everybody have been saying that it's going to take 15 years to build these things.
Yeah.
Oh well, people always say that about everything. It's to bring the chip fabs back to the U.S. is going to take 15 years to do this. These timelines are deliberately exaggerated in order to weaponize these estimates. Earlier, you touched on my bête noire, so I don't know if we should dig into it, but I will say that the common comprehension of the Industrial Revolution and what industrialization really is completely off track. The Industrial Revolution was a social revolution, certainly, which is why historians are interested in it. But true industrialization, as in the ability to manufacture goods with superior quality at scale, it has nothing to do with windmills and steam engines, despite what people think. It actually has its origin in the production of interchangeable parts for firearms, which initially started in France and was imported into the U.S. by I just lost my Thomas Jefferson. And so it has a very interesting history, the history of industrialization, but it's not in history books. It's actually, there's a gap in the history books between the Industrial Revolution and the Machine Age, a 50-year gap. And in that 50-year gap is when industrialization was born. So it's an interesting.
Well, I could subscribe to that, certainly. I mean, if you look at, when I was working in Istanbul, you'd walk down to the seafront and there'd be these museums and there were all these cannons and, military objects. And you look on the side of them, who made them? Well, Krupp made them out of Germany. And these are from the Ottoman period. And it wouldn't surprise me at all to learn that it's the military that led to the machine tool industry, is what I'm saying.
Exactly. The U.S. won the Revolutionary War with weapons that they purchased from their enemy, and they were determined that they would never do that again. And they determined that they would have independence in arms manufacturing. They set up 2 armories, Springfield and Harper's Ferry. And one of the very interesting thing is that there was a deliberate policy in Springfield of using contract labor as opposed to employees. So different aspects of the Industrial Revolution were simultaneously developing at Harper's Ferry and Springfield. But when they came to Springfield, like when the Harper's Ferry innovations were transferred to Springfield, it was also transferred to independent contractors who then used those techniques for consumer production. They started with things like clocks and sewing machines. But the real driver of industrialization is not assembly lines or division of labor, because these things actually existed to the earliest recorded history. The real driver of industrialization is precision and interchangeable parts that don't need filing or fitting to assemble. And until as late as the 1920s, those factories had an army of fitters whose tool was file, and they file away at things until they fit together. And that, of course, was a drain on productivity. Also a drain on material. The trigger on a musket before Harper's Ferry, the trigger on a musket, there was a pound of metal that had to be filed down. So it's insane, the waste. And then that also on your nanotechnology question, nanotechnologies, in my humble opinion, nanotechnology's most obvious or biggest application is to reduce waste product in industrial settings. If you coat a silicone wafer with the photoresist using nanotechnology, you avoid the 90% waste of the photoresist chemical that they currently have. What they do now is they put a drop on the wafer and they spin it in a centrifuge, and 90% of the photoresist chemical hits the walls of the centrifuge. If you coat using a nanotechnology process, which places the molecules onto the wafer one at a time, there's tremendous reduction in waste. So it does have industrial applications that are very interesting, but they're kind of
so nanotech is basically about coatings. It remains about coatings. Like I said, it's about.
I believe that that's the most obvious application. I mean, there may be others. I don't consider myself an expert on nanotechnology, but I was a consultant to a nanotechnology company, and I advised them if they wanted to raise money to forget about all of the other wonderful possible applications that they kept talking about and just focus on this single business case that I just described to you.
Makes sense. There's a big survey in Skolkovo, which was done, I guess, 2015 or something, and they asked the students of this premier Russian university to come up with their view of where industry would be in 20 years' time. And it was a remarkably uninspiring survey. I mean, people didn't come up with anything interesting, and they came up with the freaking obvious, there'll be more old people. How do we care for more old people? This kind of shit. They really didn't see where it was going. And that just confirmed to me that massive advancements in science and technology take place on the margins. They're not things that people are going to see happening. They're going to come out of left field, and suddenly you're going to have massive advances that nobody thought was coming. But it's not going to come out of governments. It's not going to come out of surveys. No. And that I'll shut myself up, but that's my big objection to the Great Reset and this proposed centralization, because centralization shuts down innovation. And when you shut down innovation, you don't get advances. And I think
centralization is the greatest evil.
Yeah.
It's the key. It's the king of all evils.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, regulation is the handmaiden of centralization.
Yeah, that's one of the things why the Trump administration put so much money into the Defense Department and has the now $1 trillion bill, is they can do more domestic spending, like those new nuclear power plants I was mentioning about, because they can, by having it go through the military, they can get around a lot of the civilian regulations. That's what. So there's a lot of infrastructure now being built by the U.S. military as a result.
I'm very impressed with Trump's performance to date. I had hopes when he came in, but I wasn't convinced, and I'm seeing those hopes materialized. At a surprisingly higher rate than I dared hope for.
Yeah, having 4 years in exile gives you a lot of time to actually plan things out in advance, rather than, oh my God, I won the election. What do I do now?
I agree.
Can I interrupt and ask a question?
Sure.
Can I interrupt and ask a question?
Yes, please.
Okay. I was beyond furious because, as you know, I'm very, very pro-Trump. I mean, there rarely is anybody that I'm very pro, but he is definitely one of the only people that I'm really enthusiastic for. And I considered what the Supreme Court did to be a real assault on its policy.
I can explain that. That actually worked out well. So what happened is the Trump was using an emergency law, and they didn't want the Republicans didn't actually want, or the Trump team doesn't want a future Democrat to have that emergency power. And immediately afterwards, like Kavanaugh's going like, hint, hint, Trump, you can use these 3 other statutes instead. So they got rid of this emergency. Me and Warhound spoke a lot about this yesterday. They got rid of the emergency thing.
Good.
And now he has other tools he can do the same things for. He immediately did it, one of those authorized use. But now, basically, the Democrats spent a year, 14 months fighting a tariff that he didn't want to have around anyways.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant, really a brilliant strategy. As I said, I'm really impressed with his performance. But like you said, 4 years is a long time to sit there planning and strategizing. Something that most people don't believe he does, but I think that's
I think the guy is fantastic. But remember, I believe in the return of the Monroe Doctrine. I believe in the return of the imperial presidency. I believe in his style. I've always liked as a man of the theater his style. I'm really thrilled about how he's bashed Ahmed al-Sharar in Syria. It's probably the thing I like the best. And how he basically treats these people in Europe, and even to some degree, Netanyahu, Netanyahu is very dangerous to Trump, because unfortunately, the neocons and the permanent Washington institutions, they believe they can still overpower Trump. This is why, of all foreign leaders, the most dangerous one for his well-being is probably Netanyahu, because Trump doesn't want to go bomb everywhere, and Bibi because he failed in Gaza, and quite frankly, just like Erdogan, both of them are way past their prime.
You're right.
And when you get that old, you get goofy, and with tremendous failures. And so what they've been saying is, well, Trump wants to sell F-35s to Turkey. Yeah, fine. They won't get them for 10 years anyway, or 15. But and Netanyahu will make sure through the Washington institutions that are entrenched, which means neocons. It means the Republican pro-military collective Washington consensus and the think tanks, and also not only the think tanks, but the diverse lobbying groups, including many of these cuckoo-muckoo adjacent minority lobbying groups, will prevent it from happening. That is a real risk to Trump. And this other goofball, Tucker Carlson, is not helping on the other side. So any move that he makes that he can still control things after the midterms, I think is crucial to turn the U.S. around. But nobody seems to realize what are some of the risks that he is facing. And so, I mean, one of the reasons why Netanyahu has done so well over the years is he's the epitome of neocon. I mean, he is the quintessential neocon. He is the original neocon, along with the Kagans, along with the Newlands, along with Brain Dead McCain, along with the South Carolina group. Although, I mean, somebody actually said some good things about the neocons in terms of philosophy, and Leo Strauss, somebody actually compared that to the founding fathers in the Americas and the kind of brutality that you need to do. But again, this is fringe stuff that doesn't really, I mean, the problem is, how does Trump continue? And that's why I love his personal team, especially Barrack is my favorite one, but I also like Witkoff and Kushner and these people. How does Trump able to keep control of things? He seems to have Rubio under control. And to accomplish what he needs to do to turn the moribund economy around and to focus the U.S. more in the Western Hemisphere, to get all that done, he needs to pass through the midterm so they don't start the Democrats with the impeachment stuff. So we're entering a very, very turbulent area. So I ask you again, what happened the other day in the Supreme Court? Does that help Trump or does that hurt Trump? On the surface, to a layperson such as me, it hurts Trump. But maybe to you that's more sophisticated, it might actually be okay for.
It's definitely a more sophisticated thing. And you can tell by the way the media reacted after the second or third hour. And all the Democrats are like, wait a minute, we've been had. And that entire attitude amongst them. Like, wait, this is not a good thing for us. This is terrible. When
Yeah.
he signed the executive order and they realized they've been screwed.
Taking away emergency power is a wonderful thing. It's just
Mm.
yet another amazing accomplishment
Mm.
of his administration. And taking it away definitively, it's really really impressive.
Mm.
And to David's point, Rubio has been the most astonishing part of Trump's administration. I, in a million years, never would have imagined that Rubio would perform the way he has.
Oh, they hated each other. They hated each other before. Do you remember that? They absolutely hated each other.
Yes,
And I think Rubio's amazing, but I also think Tom Barrack, for my main interest in the world, is amazing. But Rubio, he's really grooming him right. And I hope that what Rubio does, and I don't know if this is possible, is find a way for Trump to stay relevant when and if Rubio comes to power. I don't know how that works, but I'm sure there's a way to keep him and his team relative.
The Board of Peace is how Trump's going to be remaining relevant in his post.
I think that's fantastic. That is so. Look, I used to be, as you know, at one time, let's try for 30 years, very, very pro Netanyahu. And as you might know now, I've swung 180 degrees in the other direction for reasons that most people know, particularly about Syria. And I just love it when everybody's trying to poo-poo the Board of Peace. And of course, the cucks in the European Union wouldn't show up. I have to say that what the Vatican did, I'm not Catholic now, so I don't want to offend the Catholics here. I was a little bit surprised that Pope Leo, and remember, I had no fondness of the last Pope, because anybody that doesn't recognize the Latin language or the Tridentine Mass, I consider that the seat is empty, as they would say in Latin. All of a sudden harked back to Pope Pius X about why he would not take the Board of Peace. But people don't understand, and somebody finally got it, and it was Viktor Orban. The Board of Peace is not about just building a Riviera in Gaza and putting an end to this thorn. It's also about dealing with Russia. It's also about dealing with Ukraine. It's about conflict management that some board can do without the confines of the European Union, without the toxicity and the absolute venom of the United Nations, and without the U.S. Congress running the show, and without the British Empire running the show. And I hope he can pull it off. I don't think that people necessarily understand it.
It's totally new Yalta. That's what I look at it. It's like this is a new way of doing things that allows us, once again, to bypass the sclerotic bureaucracies that have prevented all these things from happening in the past. We can do things at a much higher pace than we have previously because of and thinking outside the box and stop allowing just the usual suspects run the show. I'll be right back. I'm getting smoked.
I think that one of the true differences between Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. today is collectivism. I think that your average Democrat is actually not only okay, but actually happy and pleased by the idea that you elect somebody, but they're basically powerless in front of a committee of decision makers. So it's this collectivist idea that the group of experts will steer the country better than an individual. And so at that point,
but Wasserman, Wasserman, hold on just a second. I see what you're saying about the Democrats, but you're also ignoring the neocons and what I call, because it's not the John Birch Society, it's not the true Ron Paul, I call it the neo-phony America First movement. That's what it is. It's really a neo-phony America First movement. It's not a real Ron Paul, and it's not a real Birch Society. I call it the phony anti-Trump America First movement, along with the neocons. So I wouldn't just focus on the Democrats alone. Congress is a problem. And remember, I am all for the presidency or the executive having much more power. And the reason I support that is because when I was a kid growing up, Senators Proxmire, all these guys from Washington, Robert, these were very knowledgeable people that learned a lot. Today, you're getting a bunch of imbeciles in there in Congress that can barely pass a bachelor degree, thinking they know something about foreign policy. And that is why I actually approve more of an imperial presidency.
I'm just talking about the voters, David. I'm saying that your average Democrat voter is perfectly okay with the idea that you're electing a nincompoop because they're not the ones who are doing the real work. You know, the real work is being done by a committee of experts. And they like that idea. It's not a problem for them. And
the problem with a committee of experts is you get Soviet Union style competency post-Stalin, which was not very good. That's the problem with the committee of experts.
I totally agree. I'm just remarking something that very few people comment on, it seems to me, which is that your average Democrat voter has no problem at all with the idea that Joe Biden is not making the decisions.
Right.
It's not a problem for them.
Yeah.
It's actually a bonus. It's a plus. It's, you know, it plays into their.
How can it be a bonus? How can it be? Look at any of these bureaucracies anywhere where they've had these committees.
If you don't know where the decision's coming from, you don't need to worry about it. I think
Right.
it's as simple as that. It's almost that bizarre. You're not talking about accountability. You're not talking about who you've put in charge to make the decision. You're quite happy with a Biden figure, or as we've discovered, some characters that weren't even Biden. I mean, they were stand-ins, you know, when the guy wasn't fit for purpose. And
Look, you haven't, the last person that even came close to making, okay, the last time you had a true presidency where the executive made decisions was Nixon and Kissinger. The only one that even came close to it was Daddy Bush. And Daddy Bush was his friends, but it was still a committee of experts. And you saw how somebody as well educated as Yale and Bush, it didn't work out too well, did it?
No, Bush was too close to the City of London. I think I'm pretty sure that Kissinger was the understudy who was advising, and he was close to London. And the Bushes they're just Anglophiles. They want to be Brits.
Yep.
And they'll follow that line. And the difficulty has always been for the US to break away from the Brits.
Yep.
You know, to watch these infiltrators who are trying to, they'll present themselves as being the most American of American, and they'll be dragging you back to London, and that's what they've been doing for 200 years.
Yeah.
And the 250th anniversary is a damn good time to expose these people, you know, and that's the line that everybody's missing in the whole Epstein saga. You know,
but I'm not sure we've gotten rid of. Look, I'm not sure we've gotten rid of that because even Craner says if you go into, for example, the derivatives markets, or you go into reinsurance, any of those things, they are still being run by London even today.
Of course. You just say you have to go to the Baltic Exchange. If you know what the Baltic Exchange is, then you know the way it works. Right? I mean, this is just hanging around. I mean, I had this opportunity as a financial reporter, of course, hanging around the City of London. But you meet the Baltic Exchange people, and you know, it's fun. It's fun. I mean, they'll joke, you know, they'll joke about the slave ships. You know, I'm not making a dark joke, but you know, those were our ships. Boom, boom, boom. You know, ha, ha, ha. You know, I mean, not so much. The great myth of the media is that everything changes. You know, the great wealth kind of vanishes within 3 generations and nobody knows who's running the world now. Come on. You know, the whole point of our grand institutions is to tell us that wealth and power tumbles down through the years. And, you know, your Baltic Exchange is to me much more, if you look into that, you'll learn an awful lot more about the flows of finance and who runs what than you'll learn from COMEX or Chicago Mercantile Exchange or whatever. After all, what's the key thing? What's the whole point of? Well, okay, so the military ensures that the dominant currency survives, but how does it do that? It does it via the sea lanes. So you've got the military, you've got the currency, you've got the sea lanes, and that's your system by which the world works.
That's
And
the
that
whole point of
means
Belt and Road is to get around.
No, but I do need to push back on one thing, if with your permission, with all of yours permission, then it's a question. I listen to Glenn Deason. The recurrences are a little more neutral, but I listen to Glenn Deason. I listen to all these other financial so-called experts in that group, and they all migrate to the same channels. We all know who they are. I haven't seen Tom for a while because I've been down here, and with the new phone, I haven't renewed my Patreon. I need to do it. But all this yap about the new multipolarity and the dollar is finished and all, I'm sorry. I was buying into that for a while. I see no signs of it whatsoever. Yes, the UN has gotten stronger and all that. I don't see this monumental change taking place that all these everyday experts are talking about.
Look, that debate is a really unreliable debate. I mean, on the one hand, there's a great point that Tom Luongo has made for a long time, and it's obvious. Anybody who's worked in the markets knows that when you have a crisis, the money flocks back to dollars. That sucks the money out of the emerging markets. That boosts the U.S. stock exchange, so that at the very least, you get advance warning. When there's when it's crisis time, you get advance warning because you see the money flow back to the US. I was working in Russia in 2008, and I was talking to fund managers in Russia who were desperate because they basically saw their asset base just liquidated overnight. I mean, they've got all their positions. They're sitting there investing in the. They were very big before Ukraine blew off. Mm-hmm. They were big in the Russian agricultural sectors. You had a lot of big people. It was kind of funny how they do it. They'd piggyback onto the back of a Russian aristocrat who had some claim to old lands, and they'd use him as branding. And then they'd go in and they'd kind of build up farmlands in Russia. There's a limit to why you want farmlands in Russia because it's too damn cold, but nonetheless, it's a country that needs a lot of food. Mm-hmm. So they'd be going in, they'd be building up all these farmlands, and they'd be allying with these former white Russians, as the figurehead that they can present to the NYSE, and they'd be building this up. And then the whole thing transitioned, of course, after 2014, Cargill, Monsanto, Bayer, everybody went into Ukraine. It's the same damn game. Because this is good land, but also because you've got a big market there that's underserved. And it's underserved because it's a real cold climate, and you haven't got,
Actually, you brought up something very interesting. You just brought up something I never thought about, and that is that as under the old system, and then I'm going to complain about something else being an expat, but under the old system, you're right. All that investment of farms was going into white Russia, including Ukraine. Remember, there were no borders between Ukraine and Russia until 2014 or 2015. Now, where is all that money heading to? It's heading to Novosibirsk and places in the middle. But guess what? That is not nearly as rich a farmland as Belarusia, as Ukraine, as the Russian part. Mm-hmm. So, so I think that we're seeing that. What do you think?
Well, it all got screwed up, of course, by sanctions. I mean, sanctions for U.S. businesses were a really bad idea because. But
also the fact that Russia, forced to act on its own, and they don't have the money, had to develop the interior of Siberia, and that's great. But you still cannot compete. Okay, if you want to develop the area around Novosibirsk, it's in southern Siberia, you can feed your own population. But what you cannot do is to become a major exporter. That can only be done by developing Western Russia. Am I right or wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. Look, it's really simple. Russia can exist, and this is the weakness of sanctions. Russia can exist forever on a self-sufficiency basis. First of all,
it's amazing to me
people
that the West failed to recognize that.
Yeah, the people can survive on a minimum, like the Chinese can, like the Indians can. They're very resilient people. But secondly, they've got enough land to just provide the minimum. What they can't do is export. So if you want to leverage Russian raw materials and Russian expanse of land into a financial power, of course, then you need to have international money, international capital. You have to have access to the markets. You have to get out there. You have to have the access to the exchanges. You have to have what Russia doesn't have, which is an internal capital market. But you can say the same damn thing about the European Union. You know, you've got to get out there, and you've got to have the system by which you can, first of all, monetize and therefore productivize the export. Russia can't do that on its own, but you can't kill Russia because it can actually survive independently. It just won't.
So let me lead you to two more questions. One danger of eliminating exports in Russia, and this is what a friend of mine in Uganda keeps reminding me, is that if you weaken too much their capital inflows, you're opening the door, and this is what happened, of course, with Seward's icebox. You're opening the door for the Chinese to start taking parts of Siberia on the southern end. That's the first thing I'm going to ask you. The second thing I'm going to ask you, it's a double question, it's completely different, and that is one of the main roles of the Trump administration actually goes all the way back to the days of Lincoln, and that is saying we're going to dump London, which we can't, but that's his dream. We're going to dump London. We're going to dump these toxic parasites in Europe by making an alliance with Russia to deal with $13 trillion of resources and just eliminate most of Europe. Is that poppy talk that Kirill Dimitrov is talking about? Or is this really something that has a chance, what we would call a third Russia-American alliance, which will come at a price to Russia? Can you see that happening that will help Russia become a little bit more solvent than it is now?
Well, I mean, it's two stories. One of them is the idea that you can isolate Russia, and this is the old British idea of the Russophobia, which goes back to the 1800s when the British aristocracy.
Oh no, even before that. No, it goes before that, because the original isolation was not the first Crimean War. It was when Russia crossed, I don't know what pass it was, but was getting too close to India. And I think that's 100 or 200 years before that, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's both. It's the route to India, and it's Russia is the big grain producer. The landowners, after they destroyed the monasteries in the 1500s, and they seized the lands of the monasteries, and they turned those into the large land holdings. Their big competitor was the Russians because of Ukraine. And they wanted to stop the Russians flooding Europe, or Britain in particular, supplying Britain with grain. They wanted that. They suddenly had the lands of the monasteries, so they thought they could.
When you're talking about that, most people don't even realize this, but the end of the first Crimean War, which flooded Europe all of a sudden with this cheap grain, boomerang, led to the Morel tariffs and led to the U.S. Civil War. It took me a while to learn that, but that was one consequence of the end of the First Crimean War. It would have been much less likely that there would have been a U.S. Civil War without the Morel tariffs and without this sudden influx of grain, which killed the grain prices all over the world. Am I right?
Well, how do you spell those Morel tariffs? Well, how do you spell that word? moral? Like the mushroom? I'm not aware of those particular tariffs, so I'd love it if you
You're not aware of the moral tariffs? That's the number one thing that created the Civil War. So, well, no, two things
Yeah.
created the Civil War. The South walked out of the Congress when they had the majority and could have just stayed in their seats.
Yeah.
And number two, the moral tariffs, Morell. You don't know the moral tariffs?
No, I don't recall them, so I'll have to look them up.
Yeah,
But,
I'm just looking them up
Find
now.
out.
but I think your point is really great, because I think, and one of the things I love doing, and one of the things we get shot down as
Oh, yes, I've heard of
conspiracy theorists, is for tying all these things together. You can tie in the British attack on the English attack on Ireland, which was about commodities, forcing them not to be importers and not to be producers of their own food, and the whole thing from one to another, all the way to the Civil War, where they wanted the South to be the commodity producer, not to be turning that into finished products, because finished products would compete with the British Empire, and the finished products had to be made in Manchester.
Yeah, that's why the Civil War was one of the most interesting things that ever happened, was the Civil War, because you had one side of the British trying to keep the Americas as a colony, and of course they were the old, ancient landholders or royalty, and then you had the industrialists going up against, it was almost like a British Civil War inside the American Civil War,
Absolutely.
which is something really, really weird. And so, of course, Russia, for whatever reason, because Britain is always their bête noire, came to the rescue with Lincoln, and without Russia, they would have had a harder time. So I'll never really understand why it is that Russia decided to back Lincoln, who was a pretty nasty brute, but they actually, even though Russia is an agricultural country, they went completely against the British because the British had harmed them by backing Lincoln.
Well,
Yeah, because the British had already demonized the Russians. Cobbett was the one who coined the phrase Russophobia. He coined it in the 1700s because Go ahead, sorry, Russell.
Well, the tariffs are very interesting from a timing point of view, and what I was talking about earlier. They came out in 1860, and which was after the supposed end of the Industrial Revolution in 1840. So they came out as deliberate protectionism against expanding industrialism in the northeast of the United States, and so the United States never would have become the industrial powerhouse that it is, or that it became, without those tariffs.
Right.
And it led to a subsequent 30 years of intense industrial development that turned the U.S. into a major exporter.
That's exactly right. I definitely heard of these tariffs. I didn't know their names specifically, but
Yeah, but the moral tariffs was
stuff.
The moral tariffs was more of an agricultural tariff, wasn't it? I think that was a tariff against, but where it really, the moral tariffs was not industrial, because that really hurt the South. The moral tariff.
Across the board.
Across the board tariffs.
Yeah.
But the intent of them was protectionism for creating an industrial base in the Northeast.
Yeah. It hurt the South because they didn't put any exceptions for, like, cotton and other things that were so important to the Southern economy. So, and that is what kind of helped lead to the Civil War, as David S. mentioned. It's I first heard about this from my father when I was like 18, 19, and we were talking about this stuff, and he was telling me about the alternate histories that we don't get told about in school.
Well, this is all.
Yeah, I mean, it really surprises me how few people know about the Morell tariffs and the devastating consequences that they had. I mean, very, very few people are aware that the Morell tariffs.
The reason they don't want you to know is because all these, basically, the British through the City of London don't want people to know these things. They don't want to know about people to know about the American system that developed because of the moral tariffs. They want everyone to believe, through the Economist and the London School of Economics and all these and Chatham House, they want everyone to think free trade is the only thing, because free trade for the British or these people is a religion.
Yeah.
Free trade is okay. The trouble with free trade, it starts out. Here's the problem. Let me tell you, one of my objections to free trade is one that lives in the third world. Free trade on paper sounds really, really nice if you had some traffic lights like Sherman Antitrust or Glass-Steagall. But when you're talking free trade, what ends up happening, I'm watching it in Argentina. Your homegrown quality meats, quality milk, quality vegetables, quality gets thrown out the window. This is one of the reasons for the farmers' revolts in Europe. They don't want a bunch of pesticided, huge industrial stuff, and it has to be pesticided to travel from Africa or South America into Europe. All free trade means really is you wipe out the middle class and the middle class businesses, the small businesses completely, pay the bondholders, and then you get the huge companies for a while. And after they're huge companies for a while, in the name of free trade, they all become financialized large companies. And so it becomes unaffordable where there's no middle class at all, immobility. What you're seeing in the world now, even though they say there's more travel than ever, I look at airplanes. One of the reasons jumbo airplanes are gone is no, you don't have more travel. People don't have the money to travel like they used to have. So, I mean, you're ending up, but instead of having homegrown stuff, which you can get, but you pay a bloody fortune for, you're ending up with industrialized crap. I go to the supermarket today, everything is in plastic this, plastic that, almost nothing in a glass bottle. That's your free trade, okay?
Well, free trade is, to be a little bit rude, asking a country to lay back and to open its legs. I mean, that really is what free trade is. It's asking people to have no protection on their own side.
But of course, they're not going to. The reason you are not going to have that, the reason they do that is that you are not allowed to be a nationalist. The people that are benefiting from this kind of JP Morgan stuff that's going on in Argentina, they don't have a nationalist pride, in their fingernail. I mean, it's basically, we're going to export at Butkis, and we have to allow, but there are certain rules to get into the States, while the States or other places, flood Argentina with cheap crap, especially from China. And part of the free trade deal is you have to accept what we send, whether you like it or not. This is basically taking a country and selling it down the river. And, for me,
that's what Money Circus was saying.
Who is benefiting? I mean, that's all you have to ask. I mean, I can understand brute politics, right? I've written a lot about might is right and, transactional politics and trying to understand, what Trump's about. And you can say, okay, is this a new era? Which I do not believe it is. I don't believe new era.
Well, I don't think it's a new era at all. No, but I think what the problem is, here's the problem.
You have to ask in that situation, if it is might is right, where's the money going? And it's not. It's not. I mean, this is the point that Richard Poe and Ian Burlingame, I don't think either of them has hit the nail on the head, but they're getting there and they're raising the right questions. They're saying that you've got what used to be called way back when the Federal Reserve was being set up, the money power, or the trust as they called it. It was just a vague way of referring to that money which takes on its own life and then starts to manipulate or determine the policy of different countries. Yeah, of course. If you're big enough in the banking world, you as a family or as a name or whatever can appear on the calendar of who's making stuff happen. But the real issue, as I got to put on Substack this morning, is the structure.
I'm really starting to wonder. I'm starting to wonder. Unfortunately, I can't hear. I'm starting to wonder if all this screaming and yelling against leftism is really just a subterfuge for being against nationalism and anybody that basically doesn't want to operate in the majority free trade system, and therefore they have to go. But it's much more convenient to call them a leftist.
It's a
And I'm really
diversion.
starting to wonder about that.
It's a diversion because look, I mean, people will rail against big families. They'll rail against banks, whatever. Okay, so what was nationalism? Well, it was powerful families, powerful banks running countries. That's what nationalism was. Who built the forts? Who built the castles? Well, it was built by money. And was that nice money, pretty money, soft, gentle money? No, it was brutal money. It was brutal because, people who build castles are not, fluffing you up in school with, little dollies. They're building structures of power. And it's interesting. I see that where I live here in Georgia, it's fascinating.
So let me push back on you and ask you this question.
Go
For
on.
the well-being of the citizenry of a particular country, or let's say small groups of countries like the Southern Cone where I am, or let's say in the Caucasus, or in the Middle East, or parts of Europe, whether it's the Southern Europe, the Germanic countries, the Slavic country, all these kind of subsets, do the people, the majority of the country, benefit more from having brutal nationalists or brutal globalists? In my experience, having been going to Europe since 1974, is the nationalist model is just as miserable as the free trade model and the City of London model, or whatever you want to call it. But more people seem to benefit from a localized brutal nationalism from this nameless financialized internationalization. That's my observation. I could be very, very wrong.
No, I think the point is right. I think people have to fight it out, and I mean, right down to the level of the school now. We're told the boys can't be boys. You can't punch someone. You can't fight something out. Why not fight things out? I mean, the only way that countries work is on the basis of a competition of ideas, and the competition of ideas sometimes, if we go back to the old days of Congress or the French Assembly or the British Parliament, the reason they had this distance in the middle of the assembly was that people couldn't rise up and stab each other with the point of their sword, because that's how angry they got in the contest for
You
right.
actually see that. You actually see stuff like that in the Korean Congress at times, in the Korean Parliament.
It still
You
happens,
see people throwing shoes at each other and fist fighting each other. But the problem is today is that you have nameless bureaucrats in this international rules-based order. That means basically you do not have a right to be your own country or your own region, and everything trickles down, except that I think it's created overall, okay, people, because you have better technology, people aren't sleeping in, the worst like they were 100 years ago, naturally, but overall, they're saying, well, we're far better off because we haven't had a major war, which is true, in years. But I see people around the world getting poorer and poorer with less and less expectations, and are being basically fecundated on the internet with all sorts of junk to keep them, as Yuval Harari always says, as useless eaters. So I'm not so sure that the current system is so good.
I don't think we are necessarily living better. I think, I'm very lucky that, I left Britain in 25 years ago. And I suffered massively financially for doing so. But on the other hand, when I walk down the street, I'm pretty happy among the relatively low level of wealth here. But it's a society that kind of works. Whereas, and I haven't been back to Britain, and I cannot really comment on it, but
well, okay, is it a low level of wealth? Okay, is it a low level of wealth? When I was a kid, in a middle-class working neighborhood of San Francisco. When the milkman came with real milk in a glass bottle every day, when anybody could buy a car and finance it for almost nothing, you could buy a nice house for $20,000, and unless you were really down and out, you didn't have homeless people all over the place. And yeah, nobody was becoming that risk, but people were living well.
100%.
They were living well. You would go to restaurants. I mean, this sounds very silly. I'm quite a gourmand, as you probably know. And they used to have like huge antipastos, all sorts of things for free. And then stuff became financialized and went right back to the Gilded Age. We're back in a Gilded Age with all this financialization. So yes, there was much less wealth. Went up to Pacific Heights and you saw the wealth. But the middle class, in my opinion, was a real middle class that probably benefited mainly from the GI Bill in the end of World War II. But you had, even in Britain, which suffered terribly after World War II, you still, by the time I got there in the very early 70s, you had a real middle class that you don't have today in Britain.
Well,
and I think you know that much better than me.
My opinion is that we've seen the peak of Western civilization. I think, historically, every civilization has had a peak and then it declines. I see no reason to believe that there isn't a similar peak in post-war Western civilization, and we hit it and we're in decline.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and we could even ask if it's even worth sitting around debating the causes, or whether we should spend more effort on looking at the route ahead.
Actually, I agree, and I'll add a subtlety to that, which is people, and I say this over and over again, people should not ask the question, why are we declining? That's the wrong question. People should ask, how did we reach that peak in the first place?
Well, I suspect that there were two peaks. There was one peak, which is the peak of creativity, whether you place that in the world of arts or the world of mechanics, or the mechanical industrial achievements. And we have been slipped into considering society itself as the peak rather than the actual mechanics that we make, because in an older civilization, people didn't worry about how glorious civilization was. They wondered whether they could actually get the water from A to B, and whether they could make the food. People concerned with production. We have been misled, and I recently sort of wondered if this whole kind of, you can call it woke, I don't like to use it too much because it's too politicized, but this whole kind of concern with people's feelings, it isn't a result of the consumer society, because with a productive society,
you are, of course it is, but what is this thing about?
No, let me just finish with very briefly. With reality, when you're engineering, you're dealing with the mechanics that make the bridge hold up. You can't talk about your feelings. It's whether the bridge stands or the bridge doesn't stand. And now we move into consumer economy, where it's about you, what would you like? And your likes and your wishes suddenly become uppermost in society. And while we're stuck here wondering about our wishes, the bridge is falling down.
I'm going to have to leave, so I just want to leave you with one more thought in addition. We have become an extremely surveillance authoritarian surveillance capitalism that goes along with this wokeness. I mean, and much to my horror, in Syria, which all you guys know I'm involved with right now, came the announcement last night that Qatar is financing smart cameras, radars, everything in the grid, so you can't drive like the rest of Western Europe. And the young people think this is great. The part that alarms me the most is the young people think this is progress. No, putting everybody in a surveillance straitjacket, I hardly call great. I mean, maybe somebody else does. That's one of the reasons I would not live in England, because of the cameras. I mean, it's for me, it's a nightmare. But you see young people celebrating this.
Well, not so much in England. I can tell you that. When they put in all the cameras in London, young people were going around disabling them. And
Not in Brazil. Everybody accepts them. Everybody has been okay. What they do now is they arrest people and they give fines so much, and eventually people turn into castrated turtles. So it's we're in a dystopian time, and the only way we're going to get out of this dystopia, I'm afraid, and I hate to say this, and I hope it happens after I'm gone, is another gigantic war. And that won't end it, but at least it will retard it. Or am I being too negative?
No, well, we already have a giant war.
It's very possible. Like I was saying earlier, I think we're in the decline of the Western Empire, and a lot of anything can happen when you're in a period of decline like that. Something that has happened historically, I believe, is a second peak. So sometimes civilizations have hit a peak, declined, reached a second higher peak, and then declined for good after.
Look, I mean, there's definitely a parallel, which is what was called the Dark Ages after the Romans exited Britain. And
are we in the Dark Ages now? Are we in the kind of initiating phase of the dark? I think with the surveillance and the extreme authoritarianism and the extreme controls, it makes me feel like we are in a technological dark age.
Look, we are.
I'm lucky enough to
look. If you take Kondratyev's point of view, which I adhere to, we are not on the cusp of a new industrial age. Klaus Schwab can go and shit himself with his freaking claims to a fourth industrial revolution. There is nothing that he has to offer, and he's doing nothing but representing the bankers and the financial power, because it is, as we saw through the numerous financial crises, that what happens each time is that interest rates get cut to zero. You get the resulting hyper-financialization, which chases out any productive capacity. You get massive Dutch disease spreading itself across the world, and people basically, stop making anything because it's easier to sit around and try to be a rentier, try to get your hand on some money, and everybody gets into the same game. But the trouble is, it's a losing game for the society as a whole, right? I mean.
When I was researching industrialization, I came upon this book, and that was before I knew anything about the WEF or anything about what I now know. I had no idea who Schwab was, and I just picked up the book because it had the word industrial in it. So as part of my research, I barely got through 1/3 of the book. It was utter tripe. It was
written by a guy called Thierry Mallory, who it's not even written by Klaus Schwab himself. The guy, all credit to him for having a gig, but he writes all the books for Schwab, and it's all bullshit. It's basically
unreadable.
But these guys amassed superpower. They amassed.
I do agree.
They amassed superpower
because of King Charles. King Charles is this damn new ageist who's been involved with the World Economic Forum for 30, 40 years. You've got these new ageists among the royal classes, and so all the hangers-on adopt the same bullshit nonsense. And unfortunately, here you have to sort of say, okay, David Icke is a new ager as well. So I mean, the guy who's supposedly pointing out the flaws of the king, Prince King, is tied up with the same kind of ideas. Now, I'm not.
Well, they're all piggybacking off. They're all piggybacking off each other, and after a while, you start to see patterns. But I mean, they're all basically piggybacking. But you're right about one thing: as I hang up, I wish I had that more discipline, because the best business to be in today is to be in the rentier class, if you can get enough out of it to survive. Because being productive, yes, there are niches. I'm trying to do one right now. But unless you're very, very capitalized, if you're less capitalized, you're almost better to hunt around, even if you only have $20,000, $30,000, and start buying stuff and renting it.
Yes. It's rentier versus scavenger. We're getting to a scavenger society, and my view is that when you have this structural change in society, which is intended to destabilize the middle, and it's not just a bunch of people kind of going out there and hatching plans. It's the way the society has found itself structured. The way the structure has changed doesn't help the stable middle anymore. And this is
No, the middle class is unwelcome. The middle class is absolutely unwelcome today.
Absolutely.
So those of us that have been stuck all our lives in the middle class are not exactly welcome specimens.
Yeah. So this instability with the destruction of the middle class, obviously it benefits those who are most positioned with assets to to intervene, but it also
we saw that in Florida with BlackRock. But here's the question, though. This is where it cannibalizes itself. When you get rid of the middle class and you have no cushion or balance, that eventually becomes a risk to the asset managers themselves, because you don't have much of a foundation without a middle class, and it goes for a while, but inevitably it has to degrade itself. Would you not agree?
It will go wild. One thing that happened, and I heard this just reading strange novels whose names I can't even remember. After the Second World War, you'd had two wars within a generation, and you had this is where the jazz music came out of. You'd had the George Melly, I think, was possibly one of the people who said this in London. They had so destroyed the society twice within 40 years that you had a whole bunch of people who were formerly middle class who are now living on the edges. They're living on the edges of society. They're scraping a survival. But those people who were scraping a survival as a result of being hit in the 1914, 1918, and then again in 1939, 45, they had nothing to lose.
Yep.
And you got a whole bunch of it. That's what gave us the economic revival, because these people had nothing to lose. You got a musical revolution, both in pop and in classical. You got the greatest period of classical music that we've ever seen. Why? Because I'm speculating, but I would say that you had a bunch of people who realized they could do nothing but play their violin. They didn't have any other way of making a living.
What was this? The 1930s or what?
During and after the Second World War, the great flourishing.
Oh, I would agree. One thing that I always have a fondness for, people ask me, I'm not an athletic guy at all. And when people ask me, and I'll never forget this, but if you want to talk about the peak of classical music, there was only one Olympics from the span of the beginning of the 20th century until today, which showed that peak of classical music. And that, of course, was Richard Strauss in the Berlin Olympics. That was the height. Think about it. Nothing ever came close before, and nothing came close afterwards again. Give it a thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
My tastes are more modern. I could, I can see Debussy as a peak. I can see,
1936 was post Debussy.
Oh, my mistake then. My mistake.
Richard Strauss. Debussy was the very first part of the 20th century, the very end of the 19th. Of course, I like all the lofty German bombastic stuff. But what we have seen in the last 20 years is classical music almost going away. Orchestras closing right and left.
Almost
There's a lot of talent, tons of talent out there, but it doesn't have a thing. Guys, I'll be happy to be back next week. I hope I have a headset and then we can run things a little bit better. But as you know, I'm usually at cafes, so I'll try to program things in. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Israeli overvalue of the shekel, except that it's not overvalued. It's the highest value currency in the world, and it's strictly because of inflows and the diminution of the dollar and all the problems it's causing. But I'll save that for the next time. So have a good day, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good time. Take care.
Yeah, I would say that that maybe that orchestral transformed into the kind of orchestral music, that impulse for rich orchestration appeared or reappeared in the 40s and 50s with trying to remember who it was that did all the orchestration for the best Frank Sinatra songs. Beautiful, beautiful orchestration, beautiful, complex, full orchestra stuff.
I
But
must
just
run
the
away with a
poetry.
couple of minutes. Excuse me.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
Maybe there's a knock at the door or something.
yeah, no worries, no worries. I myself had to take a brief pause earlier. Yeah. I wish I could remember who I'm thinking of.
Yeah, no. Anyways, yeah. So we, JP, our faithful watcher, wanted to get our thoughts on Rupert Lowe, and I've been listening to Sargon of Akkad talk about it. I was just listening to him before that, and he was describing him as basically a Arthur Wellesley Wellington-like figure of this, coming out of the traditional British aristocracy, loyal to England crowd, and he's like going out, sort of like said something like, it's just like, yep, well, I guess we got to go fight Napoleon now, and his response to the immigration situation.
Well, I'm quite impressed with what I see, and he seems to have. I was listening just yesterday to his strategy, which seems to be a sound one. He's trying to establish instead of trying to sweep the country all at once, he's trying to establish a stronghold in a pattern for success that can be reproduced. He's in a way, you could say that he's adopting Antifa tactics. He really is. He really is. And I think that's probably wise. Once he establishes the pattern for creating the grassroots action and movement, then they can seed and spread the pattern. And I think that's we're talking about Rupert Lowe, and I'm impressed with what I see so far.
Mm-hmm. And we're also getting the whole breakdown of reform, not accelerating its collapse earlier than I expected. I thought they would form the next government, bring in some Thatcherite-like stuff that would be good, but they'd ultimately blow it because they wouldn't address immigration, which is the big problem. The problem is for many of these European states is they're ethno-states. They have no experience, unlike, say, any of the Americas, of bringing in large populations and assimilating them.
Well, Lowe, for what it's worth, does not see Farage as a Thatcherite. He sees him as a Blairite.
Yeah, I hear that as well. But I think, from what I can see, he would be more. He is Blairite, but he has his economics are Thatcherism.
Yes, Farage is definitely his own worst enemy.
Yeah, it is. It's a revival of Thatcher Light, as far as I can see. Of course, it can't be Thatcherism because Thatcherism was this transition from the manufacturing economy to the service sector. Yeah. And that's now happened. So it can't happen again.
It ultimately failed.
It ultimately failed. I mean, the privatization, as various politicians, conservative politicians, stated, went one stage too far when they privatized the British rail, the train system, because the train system was just a classic example of something which has to be run on a national level. You can't break it up into companies because you break it into corporations, you make it dysfunctional. That's the reason it was centralized in the first place. Yeah. But that was just, the obvious example. There'll be many. There's much more complex examples. For example, privatization of water and electricity, where they set up this false competition, which they also introduced into the National Health Service, it began from these are Milton Friedman and other ideas that, the market knew best. But the problem was you couldn't introduce the market into a centralized British government, and the British government was totally centralized. I mean, they had nationalized everything. So when they introduced supposedly the free market, it was false, literally false. They set up a department, I forget what its name was, but a department for competition. This is almost Soviet.
The Central Planning Commission.
Central Planning Commission. And
Yep.
in this department would take the electricity industry, divide it into regions, first of all, then subdivide those regions and apportion them out to companies. And then they didn't have a competitive system because people were still billed domestically by the local council. So then they had to create a false competition, a fake competition, where they would create the imitation that these corporations were competing with each other. Now, this is no different to what I discovered when I went to work in Russia. And they were trying to modernize the Russian economy. I'm talking about the mid-2000s up to about 2010. And the problem they had, you take a city like Togliatti. Togliatti is named after an Italian communist. It's also where they put the Fiat factory, which became Lada. So it was the Italian Fiat cars, rebranded as Lada, built in Togliatti. And the problem was that the way the Soviets had built up the economy was that the state financed the car factory, and the car factory paid its taxes to the local city and thus supported the city, which paid all the pensions and kept the hot water running and everything else, which meant that when you came to the 2010s and you tried to sell off Lada stroke Fiat to, say, the French or the Germans, they couldn't really sell it off because the French or the Germans buying a Russian car company would not want to have also the responsibility to finance the local administration and all the welfare and pensions of all the previous employees of the factory. So basically you had a massively complicated system which you couldn't reverse engineer. And that's what Margaret Thatcher's privatization was. It was reverse engineering, trying to reverse engineer the privatization which had been put in place during the Second World War, when they nationalized the coal industry, the rail industry, etc., etc., etc. These had all been built by private companies. And it's wonderful to take a libertarian view and say, well, that's true. Everything was built, all those grand wedding cake houses in Notting Hill, they were all built by private companies, yes. But they all at one point or another went bankrupt. And when they went bankrupt, they were bought by the state.
Yeah, we had a similar situation here with our rail system. And then what happened is they set up like two, not crown corporations essentially, but they did the government had a heavy hand in creating CN and CP, and they're kind of run as like this almost by the government. They set the rates. It's not very competitive. There's no versus.
Yeah, fake competition basically, and it still exists to this day in the National Health Service, which the British claim to be their religion. The national religion is the National Health Service, except that it's being again reverse engineered and privatized. But it's being privatized on a very fake basis because the whole thing is centralized. The only way you can privatize something, logically, I think we'd all agree on this, is to break the thing up. And I have a real argument with this concept of creative destruction, because we're told by the tech bros They're always talking about, what was the phrase they use? Disruptive innovation or whatever, disruption. Yeah. Disruption is fine, but all it means at the moment is rent seeking. You're going into a system which is regulated by the government. Look at Palantir. The entire operation is regulated by the government. Palantir comes in and says, oh, yeah, we're the private sector. Mr. Karp, Mr. Thiel, we're going to get in there and we're going to revolutionize everything, except that the entire the umbrella is government.
Yeah.
You're not private at all. The only way you can really do the Thatcher thing is to get in there, and you've got to break that umbrella. You break up those corporations, turn them into something like credit unions or something local.
Yeah.
And then you can privatize it. But you've got to put the ownership back into the hands of the people. Because if you put the hands into the reason we've got the oligarchy, which has emerged from the 1980s deregulation, is that they never broke up the government system. They kept it as a government system, but they just handed it over to the tech bros.
I think that the area in the U.S. where that's most likely to happen is food. I think that there's a strong grassroots movement to break up the food monopolies and allow individual, a true free market of food in the U.S. And I think there's a reasonable chance that will succeed. But I also think that in certain cases, like national infrastructure, I used to work for the International Air Transport Association. And I do believe that there are some industries which are best nationalized, like airlines. It's difficult to make them profitable anyway, so it's not really a good sector for private, I won't say speculators, but private investment that wants to see a good return. They say that the best way to make a small fortune in the airline business is to start with a large one. So it makes sense to nationalize them, especially because as I said at one point when Swiss Air was on the verge of bankruptcy, I said to all my colleagues, they'll never go bankrupt because if they did, that means that those planes that fly to Zurich might start flying to London instead. That would be a major problem.
I'll give you an interesting parallel, supporting argument to what you've said. My late father was a British state servant, worked as a diplomat in various third world countries. So I used to fly out there as a kid. And of course, we'd fly out with British Airways because this was the state airline. And I remember in the 1970s, we'd receive our air ticket, and printed on the air ticket would be the price. And it'd be like £4,000 to fly from London to the Caribbean. £4,000, which in today's money is like 20,000.
Yep.
Something like that. Now, of course, what did that do? Well, that boosted GDP, didn't it? It was a state-owned corporation. And they buffed up the prices. And then they booked that to gross domestic product, which made, the country more powerful, which increased its ability to borrow money. And the whole thing was just a darn game. They had no idea. I mean, I'm sure the cost of the ticket was humongous. I'm sure it was. And I flew with my 3 siblings, and we would travel. I would be like 16, and they'd be kids, and we'd be traveling as, I forget what the phrase was, but young adults traveling alone or something like that. And we'd meet the parents at the other end. But the supposed price of the tickets was just ludicrous. But that's the way the system was run. But at the same time, the trains, for example, and then don't get Britons into the issue of trains because they begin to cry. The entire train network was ripped up and destroyed in the 1960s. and it stopped at practically every village in the country. It was an incredible network. And it's been, by privatizing it, the prices have gone through the roof. It's now ludicrous. So it's, in some cases, if you want to go from England to Scotland, it's cheaper to fly than to take a train.
Yep.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And the whole point for which the train system was built, which wasn't built out of love of the common person, it was built to get the people to the factories. It was built to make the, but then we went through a liberalism where that we were told that was bad. To get the evil capitalist was getting the people to the factories. Well, okay, fine. So we've got rid of the evil capitalists and we've got rid of the factories, and now we're deindustrialized. And now what do you want? What do you want to do now?
Invade Russia.
That's right.
Invade Russia. Absolutely.
That's perfect.
Screw up our
solution.
own country, go screw up another one.
Yep. I mean, did you hear Callis? Their plan now is to rob people 15% of their pension funds in Europe to pay for the rearmament plans.
Yeah, van der Leyen has also said this.
Yeah.
That they want to basically dig into the pension plans in order to finance the war against Russia. There is no logical argument which is made anywhere for the war on Russia. If you try to reach the British on this topic, and as I say, I don't live there, and I haven't tried, although I try only through my writing. It's very, very hard to break through because they have been so propagandized that this is the great enemy, and they can't see that enemy or not, you have to look at your interests. Where are your interests being pushed? I mean, I'm not saying forget the history of Russia or forget the history of Germany or whatever. I'm talking about now. If you're going to remilitarize Germany, which is the proposal, which Harvey Schlanger said the other day, I forget his phrase, he said that this should fill every European with a shudder of reality.
Or as I say with my Eastern European humor, how could that possibly go wrong?
Exactly. How can that go wrong? Having gone wrong twice before. What can possibly go wrong the third time? This is a repetition of the same darn game. And it's a game being played with no view to the consequences, or alternatively, somebody does have a view to the consequences. And whatever the outcome is, it's directed inwards at our society. I mean, that's the whole point that people forget about war. It's not about the other person. It's about you. It changes your society. It, first of all, in very quick order, destroyed the wealth that the British and the European empires experienced. And if you take that parallel, it's going to have the same effect on the Americans. Now, we don't need to get to the next step. We say, where would the money go next? Well, I don't know. Maybe go to South Pacific. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be run out of Hawaii or out of some smart cities in the South Pacific. I don't know. But the point is that if this war trajectory is allowed to go ahead, it will have the same effect on the dominant economic power that it had on the dominant economic power 100 years ago. And
I don't think the war is happening. I think it's revolution. That's my theory. Is you go around stealing all the money of all the people, the guillotines and the pitchforks come out pretty quickly. I think will be the likely outcome. These guys don't have the military, as Wasserman and I were pointing out earlier. Can't make an army overnight. And the Germans had mass protests of the youth against the conscription bill. They still passed it. And then what happened is Schultz realized that the only sizable group of people they could conscript were Muslim men. And they're like, oh, wait, maybe this is not such a good idea anyways. So we'll see what happens. But
Well,
foreign policy.
I'm still waiting for the soccer hooligans to rise up.
yeah.
Well, we're all waiting for people to rise up and rise up in the right way. I mean, that's the game that we're seeing, is that on the one hand, you've got an acceleration of these arrests for wrong speak in the UK. So if you protest against the migration, you stand a good chance of being arrested.
Yes.
And at the same time, Foreign Policy magazine and the Canadian newspapers, who we know are 100% state controlled, state financed directly, and then the British newspapers, which are not directly state financed but are aligned with the state. And incidentally, the Lord Rothermere, who is the descendant of the historic owners of the Daily Mail, is now buying the Daily Telegraph. So the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail are going to be the same family. Rothermere. Rothermere was very, very powerful during the First and Second World Wars in shaping public opinion. First of all, he supported the rise of Hitler, and secondly, shaped the public response. So now you've got Rothermere not only owning the Mail, but now owning the Telegraph. And they're going to push the British in the direction of war. And the British
No one reads newspapers anymore.
Well, nobody reads them. It's weird. They've evolved their purpose. They get quoted on TV. They get quoted on social media. They are much less important than before.
Yeah.
And this is the reason for the battle to control social media. This is the reason that we have such... I mean, all these topics line up. I mean, look, you've got this Foreign Policy magazine saying that the migrants should now populate the army. The Canadian press reported the same. Irish press reported the same, all at the same time. It's a great idea that all these migrants should fill the army. Well, where are the migrants living in Ireland? They're living in military bases, as well as being pushed into towns, but they're living in military bases in Ireland. And everybody's wondering why these single-age men are sitting in military bases in Ireland, waiting for what? Well, now you've got your answer. The Irish press have answered that these people are going to fill the military. Why? Because the Irish government, or whoever runs the Irish government, above it, in Brussels or wherever, they know that the Irish people won't line up for war.
Well, so it's not only that,
if you offer people citizenship, they've got a reason.
It's that they know that Irish soldiers will not fire on their own.
Yep.
Well, it's partly that. And if you look on social media, my goodness, you've got posts now flattering the IRA, flattering the Irish Republican Army, and saying, where are you, Irish? Stand up for your country. And the bizarre thing is that when I was a kid, before I became a journalist, I was an avid newspaper reader, even at the age of 15. And I would grab all the different newspapers. And for example, on the topic of Ireland, I would read the Telegraph, I would read the Mail, I would read the Guardian, the Times. I would try to work out what's going on because, frankly, it was, even from the point of view of a 15-year-old, it was pretty awful. We had bombs going off in London. We had Mountbatten, this is Prince Andrew's uncle, blown up in his fishing boat. Then later in the 1980s, of course, there would be the attempt to kill Margaret Thatcher. All these bombs were going off, and they took all the litter bins, the garbage, the trash bins out of the metro stations,
Yes,
because presumably bombs could be dropped, and then they locked all the seats on the. You used to be able to lift up the seats on the underground and stick your
in
bag.
Montreal, they welded all the doors of the mailboxes shut.
Absolutely, everything was welded down because of this supposed imminent threat from the Irish, who were going to blow us all up. And now you look at it, and the Irish just say, "Take your country back," and people are posting pictures of the IRA.
Yep.
And the whole thing has gone upside down.
Yep. And you also had I don't know if you're familiar, either you're familiar with the Amelia phenomenon in the United Kingdom.
No.
So the government made this really bad computer game of for teenagers to use, in which you're encouraged to not go out and protest and trust the system. Problem is, if they put it in a really attractive goth girl.
Yes, I know. Yes.
If you go down the revolutionary line, so it's like if you disobey the state, you get this really attractive chick. And they didn't understand what they were doing. And now there's all sorts of memes, all sorts of AI videos of Amelia singing.
Was this to monitor the public reaction, to kind of track people's reaction, or?
No, it was it was just sort of supposed to be like some civil servant running. Didn't realize what they were doing.
It was a propaganda game.
Yeah, it was a propaganda game to discourage people from engaging in violence or in protest against the state. And of course, if you follow that protest line, you get the hot chick.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of this is, we would all like to take the beneficent kind of view towards people. I mean, there was a large element, I'm sure, in the British government where they financed their ISIS terrorists abroad, and then they retire them home to Britain. And all the British are saying, wait a minute, this guy's an ISIS terrorist abroad, and now you're kind of bringing him home and you're giving him a council house and a pension. And we can't quite understand this because on the one hand, it's the enemy. On the other hand, he's, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you can't, refuse refugees. And people begin to say, okay, these are all the same damn people. This is a game which is being played with the people, where you have the enemy abroad is not. It's more complicated, Hybrid warfare told us that the enemy is everywhere. Even the civilian is an enemy. We should all be surveilled because we are all a potential threat. And then we have the game of the various groups which we finance to, overthrow Syria or whatever, Libya or whatever, and then we bring them home. And to me, this is it's actually personal because it goes all the way back to the 1960s when I was a baby. Mm-hmm. And my dad was working in Nigeria. Mm. And the British, as far as I can see, because I didn't have a very good relationship with my father. I wish I had, because the damn fool who's dead now, bless him, but he had a good story to tell, but he wouldn't tell it. And so I've had to piece it together. And he and a couple of well-known journalists kicked off the Biafra War. That was his job. That was his job, to go up to Biafra and kick off the war. Because if you don't know Nigerian politics, to put it in one sentence, the British didn't want Nigeria, which is a huge oil producer.
Right.
They didn't want Nigeria united.
Yep.
So they played off the various tribes against each other. And which is
what they do.
And they particularly wanted to, did create this division up in Biafra. And my dad was involved in creating that. Damn fool wouldn't tell his story. He went to the grave with his secrets. And he was also in Somalia in the 1990s. So I think he had a long fracking history. Oh, and he was
economic hitman.
Oh, you know where else my dad was? He was in Grenada in the 1970s. Exactly as Morris
Okay,
Bishop.
I gotta go downstairs and get my birthday cake. I'll be right back. You guys carry on without me.
Yes, yes. So,
So I mean, it's a weird story having.
yes, that paints a very clear picture.
You think that's a clear picture? I think it's a clear picture. I'm glad you agree. I think it's a damn clear picture. I mean, I can't come to any other conclusion about it. And on the other side of my family, we're the old South African sugar planters, tea planters, and we have a nasty history. We were mentioned in the British Parliament for our treatment of slaves.
Mm-hmm.
The only family to have been individually sanctioned by an act of Parliament for our treatment of slaves.
That is so egregious.
The reason I mention that is not you can't you can't get applause from the bleachers. The reason I mention that is I do think we were on the all of us were watched, I think, actually. It's a weird thing to say, but I think we were watched because not because I'm anything special, but just because we were already on the we were already on the books.
I come from a family that was watched as well.
Really?
Yes. My grandfather was a communist labor organizer.
Where?
In New York.
Mm-hmm.
He was blackballed, by during the McCarthy era.
Mm-hmm.
He was. I like to think. I wasn't sophisticated enough to ask him while he was still alive, but I like to think he was a Menshevik, not a Bolshevik.
Mm-hmm.
But based on his behavior and what I know about his history, he was. And but he was a true believer in the collective action against power and oppression, and he was a very courageous and was not afraid to fight and possibly die for it. And so then so he had an FBI dossier, and then
of course,
and then my father did as well, just because he was in the family and he was the son.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's I don't think, but maybe there is. I don't know if there's an FBI dossier on me. I doubt it. My exploits are too trivial for.
Likewise with mine. Yes. Yeah. I'm nobody, but I think that in our modern world of surveillance, I think it does trickle down. I think it does. By the way, did you watch the movie? It was called 1971, which is the documentary made by the people who raided the FBI offices in 1971, and they uncovered the FBI's monitoring of the most humble civilians because of their political affiliation, or just teachers, accountants, normal people.
Well, it is certainly possible that I do have a dossier just because of my contrarian opinions.
I think anybody who has contrarian opinions, I think it goes further than that. I am firmly of the opinion that you can be directly manipulated in terms of people being pushed in your direction, employers being instructed to monitor. It's a really complicated thing to mention because it immediately makes people say that you're crazy. Because how could there possibly be such a system of paying attention to lowly people, on
They
such
did
a
in East
scale?
Germany.
But they did it, you're absolutely right. They did it purely with analog methods in East Germany. They had 50% of the population watching over the other 50%. And I actually think that if you put it from the point of view, you look at it from the point of view of the wealthy and powerful, who are looking for something to do with their lives. After all, I mean, you and I have no problem what to do with our lives. We're busy surviving. We have businesses to manage. We have bills to pay. We get out of bed and we start working. These wealthy get out of bed and they say, well, what shall I do today?
I know. I'll save the
I've got
world.
nothing to do. Nothing to do.
Yeah.
Well, let's play. Of course, there's this famous John Fowles novel you probably know, the Magus.
I have heard of it. I unfortunately haven't read it.
I'd recommend either read it or watch. It's one of those few books that has an equally great movie.
Oh, okay.
About it.
Okay, so
and the movie is just as good.
Let me write down the movies. Magus in 1970 what?
When did the other book? The book was called 1971, but I'm going to check. Hang on. The movie, the documentary, 1970. Yeah, it's called. I can send you a link to it. I'll DM you, but it's called 1971. The notorious activist burglary of an FBI office that led to the Bureau's abuses against dissidents being exposed. It was actually exposed by the Washington Post, would you believe it? Back in the day. They did something. So it's called, it's a stupid name for a movie because it's completely impossible to search. It's literally in numbers, 1971. That's the name of the movie. But I'll send you the link to it. And the other one is the Magus or Magus, and
what is the grammatical rule for that? A G in between two vowels, hard or soft?
I don't know. 1968. Damn it! It was made with Michael Caine.
Oh, wow.
1968. I didn't realize it was old. I didn't even realize the novel was that old. When did John Fowles write it? For goodness sakes! It's an incredible book. It's supposedly kind of Masonic and Kabbalistic, but it's a very, very interesting book.
Oh, I love that stuff. I do.
It's really interesting. And the movie actually I have never watched. But the subheader is I read your fortune. Candice Bergen and Michael Caine.
Oh, that's an interesting combination.
You can't wish for anything better. So yeah. Oh, darn it! I wish we could take movies back into our own hands, and.
Well, actually, I think that with the dissolution, with the people fleeing from California because of the wealth tax, this is actually an opportune moment for a more distributed power in terms of movie making and distribution.
It could be. It could be. And also the challenge from AI, because the basic stuff, the stuff they've been producing lately, can be produced by AI. If you just want to do a remake.
To an extent, it's I don't think.
Well, I'm not talking about quality. I'm talking about if you want to do a remake of Marvel, that can be done by AI. But if you want to produce quality,
it's very. I mean, AI is another one of my areas of specialization, and you can produce some very impressive stuff for about 30 seconds or 60 seconds, but it would be unthinkable in my mind to try and produce an entire 90 or 120 minutes of AI. It's
You
just
you wouldn't get the acting. You wouldn't
well,
get the
you wouldn't get anything.
humanity.
Yeah.
You wouldn't get the connection.
No, it just wouldn't, and also it's the at a very technical level, the AI has no memory, so it wouldn't remain consistent from scene to scene. People's faces would change. You simply can't maintain consistency for more than 30 or 60 seconds.
Really.
Yes, it's
And it's
very,
supposed
very.
to, the same applies to creating AI versions of novels then.
Yeah, well,
Did
no,
it?
that's different. This is one of my areas of research. So I've started doing published research in AI based on my hypothesis that what makes large language models so effective is not the technology, it's the language. And my hypothesis is that language is the compressed and encoded sum of human cognition over 100,000 years and 100 million people. Sorry, 100 billion people. And and I've started experiments to prove that by my first proof was to prove that the prevalent theory right now in AI is called the scaling hypothesis. And the idea is that the more books you read and the more parameters you add to the model, the more you get emergence, as they call it, of seeming intelligence. And so they think it's entirely dependent on scale. And so I did a proof a couple months ago that I ran an exactly parallel controlled experiment with all parameters identical except for one. And the parameter that changed was the language that was being that was the model was being trained on. And it turns out that previous work was very shallow. They everybody got to English. They tried Turkish once. They said Turkish is impossible. Let's stay on English, and everybody stayed on English. But it turns out that if you train a model on French, the emergence is 5 to 10 times faster than in English, based solely on the language change, which means that scaling is not everything, and that the encoding of the language, there are deep structures in language that the massive so the LLM, the AI is like a microscope, or it's an instrument which allows us to detect these structures that are deep in language that can only be detected when you ingest it at a massive level and run a massive level of analysis on it. And but I ask people, what's more likely, that a few thousand people working for 10 years have managed to make a machine sound intelligent, or that 100 billion human beings working over 100,000 years managed to encode into language some kind of magic, some kind of structure so deep that when you play it back like a record, it sounds intelligent. And so that's my belief that LLMs are significantly different from every other form of generative AI. And that's why they make sense when the large graphics models can't really generate more than 30 or 60 seconds.
That's interesting. So they're never going to create a symphony.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Music has some structure to it, and I've heard some amazing generative music, some amazing stuff, where they take a song and they change the style of the song.
They do great with pop music. They do great with 3 minutes.
Yeah, but I don't think that AI will write a symphony. And what was I going to say? I was going to say that oh, I forget what I was going to say. So it must not have been important. So
No, you deep thoughts. I mean, I'd need you to explain that to me 2 times more for me to grasp it. But it's Definitely, there are the limits there. I'm battered mentally between these proponents of AI, such as Mike Adams, who are batting out hundreds of AI books. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I want to read an AI book, frankly. You know, I mean, maybe if it's a guide to fixing a car, yes, there's an
That's
argument.
what I was going to say. I was going to say that I use AI extensively in my writing, but I don't let it write the book.
Mhm.
I use it as a sounding board, as an editor, because as you know, for most people, it's much easier to think in discussion than it is to think alone.
Mm.
No,
And
you're
so,
absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, I suffer from the lack of discussion because I'm stuck out here in the Caucasus. I'm not in New York City or somewhere, and I don't have the kind of party around me, you know, to bash out ideas and to be smashed back, you know, my stupid ideas, you know,
I
which is equally important. You know, when I come up with something crazy, you know, slap me back. I don't get that, and that's a real problem. And of course, if you go, I don't use AI, perhaps for that reason,
yeah,
because
excuse me for a second.
it would only magnify my own freaking neuroses. I don't need that.
Yeah. So yeah, turns out the second elevator in the building's on service today for some reason. So it took a little longer to get back than I
Okay.
expected,
Welcome back.
or to get down there. But I was curious, what is life? You mentioned it briefly, how life in Georgia is. How is life in there? And because I'm thinking if I might come. So
Oh, you'd be very welcome. The There's 100 angles to this, you know. I mean, I have some friends who are very wealthy. They don't live here; they live out in Malaysia and places like that. But I am in contact with a lot of people that are, you know, that are living in different parts of the world, and they're living in different parts of the world because not that they see any particular threat within their home country, but they see they see greater freedom or greater opportunity in other parts of the world. And there's definitely a big movement among the very wealthy set who are moving to places like Malaysia. Not so much Singapore. Singapore is a little bit rigid,
yeah.
politically, and it's run by the city of London.
Mhm.
But there are, you know, other places. I mean, Indonesia is not, I would not say necessarily run by the powers of freedom, let's say. But on the other hand, if you're a foreigner, you're not locked into that society. So you're, you know, you find yourself a kind of an outlier, and therefore, even though it's a 90% Muslim state, it doesn't necessarily affect you if you live there, you know. There's, you know, if I had the money, which I don't, I probably would be finding myself in some part of Asia, because there's something about the Asian mind. And I would plot this on a graph beginning in Moscow and moving eastwards, you know, because, you know, one of the things that the Westerner view of Russia doesn't really grasp is that Moscow is half Asian.
yes,
Yeah.
they really don't. They really don't understand.
It's a completely different view of the world from from London or New York or LA. It's just different. It's just a different world.
Yeah.
And once you move east from that, of course, then you're wholly into Asia. So, you know, the Russians are kind of like half European.
I
And
agree.
once you get to the east, you're in a different world. And those worlds have their benefit. And I'm not talking here about you know, the mechanics of surveillance or whatever. I'm talking about the attitude to life.
Mhm.
I think we're seeing this distinction coming forth. And the way I'd put it is not that the governments are good versus governments that are bad. I think it's the way that the people receive it. Look at the problem we have in Britain, and look at the problem that we have in Canada, particularly, and Australia. Let's add Australia. In those countries are very good people. People not unlike us. You know, whoever we are, they're not unlike us. They've all come to some extent from Europe, and yet they were placed under that threat, that COVID threat. They've been placed under the increasing surveillance state, and they're going along with it.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing. So it's not. I'm not talking about the governments. I'm talking about the Asians are not going along with it. The Asians don't accept it. Now, I would love, actually, before I die, to spend 8 years or so working in China. I'd love, if I could, because I'd like to, as I say, grok the Chinese perspective. I saw a little bit of it in Russia. The beauty of Russia was they lived under a dysfunctional system.
Yeah.
There was no way to live under communism except to engage in the same corruption as the government. So the government was corrupt, so you had to be corrupt. They needed to do bakshish, you needed to do bakshish. You know, you did. That's how you did it. I remember a colleague of mine who, once the Russian government, it was about 2009, perhaps, e-government started to come into force. And she had a newborn baby and she wanted to travel to the US, and she couldn't get a passport for the kid because, you know, the process was the process. And she said, yeah, under the old system, I could have paid someone $200 and I could have had that damn passport in a week.
Yeah.
You know? Now I can't, you know? So the further you go east, the less the people will tolerate the strictures of government. And so I think that's part of it. I don't know. I need to get it. One of the characters I know who's just moved out of Malaysia is Charles Ortel. You may know of him. He's just gone out there. And so there are a number of people who are making new lives. Now, okay, so Georgia. I would state another thing, and this is not critical of government at all, but I think the more well, look at Canada. The cost of the national government in the past 15 years has supposedly, according, I haven't checked this out, but something of it, it's risen 10 times. They've massively increased the expenditure on government. The British, during the height of COVID, allocated 37 billion pounds, that's like $45 billion, to surveillance, supposedly for the COVID passport. The COVID passport was never introduced, never arrived. So where the hell did that $45 billion go? Into some area of surveillance. Now, you logically would conclude that the poorer the government, the less overreach.
Right.
The poorer the government, the less ability it has to snoop into every aspect of your life, because it just doesn't have the capacity to do so. So my view would be the best places to live are the places that just don't have the most overreaching and functional government. And that we can, you know, to reach back to my comment about, you know, being able to pay $200 and get your kid's passport in a week. A little bit of corruption, a little bit of dysfunctionality, a little bit of normality, the way humans work, not the way robots work, the way humans work. That's where we want to live. We don't want to live in a robotic state where they come in and they manipulate every aspect of your life and tell you, sorry, but you didn't comply with this one of the 37 required commands, and thus, you're locked out of this, which is what the digital passport will do.
Mhm.
It will aggregate your compliance, and
I'm
it will
not
tell you
against.
that
I'm not
that
against what
you
you said.
failed on 1 out of 37 or 1 out of 50 or 1 out of 100, and because of that you can't take the train.
Yeah, and I'm not. Certainly, I agree with that, and I'm not against a mild amount of corruption like you were describing, but I do.
Mild amounts of corruption are essential.
But I do think that
I didn't
I've
realize
experienced.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday. At one point, the Japanese, I don't know what they were called, the rulers, but the Japanese rulers outlawed the wheel. Did you know that? They actually outlawed the wheel because they wanted to force everybody to travel by barge along the rivers. And they wanted the roads to be free for the military. So they actually passed a law which forbid the use of the wheel. And this is from the Japanese, who, as we know, we might agree, are among the most intelligent human civilizations that have ever existed. I mean, you can't knock the Japanese for downright brains.
Mhm.
And yet they forbid the wheel.
Mhm.
And if you look at that, you have to say, okay, well, what's the possibility of lunacy that our governments, who are less intelligent than the Japanese,
Mhm.
what can they get up to in the future?
Yeah.
What
I'm completely against central
can they
power.
imagine?
Yeah,
Where they tell us, well, you can't do this or you can't do that because it interferes with our bureaucratic process.
yeah,
And that's where we're headed.
I'm completely against centralized power. I'm
Banning the
completely,
wheel is the inversion of logic. Yes, the wheel was the fastest way to get from A to B. The only
Yeah.
reason to ban the wheel in Japan, I'll have to look up the date. Look it up for you. The only reason to ban the wheel in Japan was to benefit the government and make its control of the people more easy.
I do agree with all that. I just wanted to say
and-
that
Edo period, 1603 to 1868. The
Yes.
Tokugawa shogunate heavily restricted the use of wheeled vehicles on the major roads to maintain political control, enhance security against rebellious daimyos, and protect infrastructure.
I just wanted to say that I believe, I could be wrong, but I subjectively believe that I've experienced in mid-America, and even in now, 50 years later, but certainly when I was younger, a society where you could achieve that kind of thing through social interaction as opposed to money. In other words, people would help you get your passport a week earlier just because you were nice to them. And I feel that I have experienced that. And this happened to me just recently when I moved from Canada to the US 5 years ago. I didn't do it properly with my car. I just drove my car across the border. I didn't get an export permit. I didn't get a. In Quebec, there's no titles, so I had no title on the car. I didn't have any form of documentation whatsoever that I was supposed to have. It was like an outright criminal act. And I went to the Motor Vehicle Bureau, and fortunately, I think I have to run. I'm going to run. But I just wanted to say that, the nice lady at the Motor Vehicle Bureau sorted it all out for me. Coming! Gotta run. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, we've been going on for about 2.5 hours. I think that I have to get a few things before I do my party tonight. But it was nice hanging out with you guys all day.
Likewise. Thank you for the invitation. It was unexpected. I just happened to log on at the right time and see it. So
that's what I originally only thought it was going to be Wasserman, but I send out the invites and see who shows up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do it again. And
Yep.
wish you a lovely evening.
You too.
And I shall go out and kick the cats out into the garden.
Okay.
Okay. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye. And I want to say goodbye to the audience as well. Bye bye.